kind of want to start off with, we all know how to prepare for a hurricane. We're in Florida. Now, the people in New York, you may not know how to prepare for a hurricane, but we do down here. But what we're going to discuss today is how do you prepare when maybe somebody has had a heart attack, stroke, or a car accident, and they cannot make medical decisions for themselves. Who is going to make that decision, and what documents do you need to have that authority? So we want to be prepared for the crisis. You know, that's something I'm big on through JP's class, is we need to be prepared before it happens. So we've got Debbie Hunt up here today.
Good morning. Good morning.
She wouldn't say she was the professional at this, but she's so much more knowledgeable than I am. I'm calling her a professional.
And he knows I'm going to keep him on track because we're going to be doing this as a series.
Yep.
And we're going to cover a number of different documents.
So what is our goal for this?
The goal is so that when if something happens to you unexpectedly, everything is in place so your family doesn't have to worry about the details. They will have what they need to get things done, whether it is a living will that says what your wishes are for the distribution of what you have, whether it be financial or real estate or personal belongings. It's talking about whether you have a power of attorney, who's going to be in charge, who's going to take care of it. It talks about some things that you have to have if you go into the hospital. Some of us kind of have gone into the hospital for surgery blind, and all of a sudden you have to fill out all these different forms that you really haven't had time to think through. Who do you want them to call if something happens, and who's going to be responsible for making those decisions? Today we're going to talk about a simple form that, okay, so I'm calling it a simple form. When I started looking at it, I thought it was really simple, really easy, and there's a lot more detail to it than you would think, and that's your do not resuscitate form. And actually, it's not just your form, because your doctor also has to agree and sign it. And in every state, it's a little bit different. So today, when we talk about it, we're just going to talk about Florida. And it was interesting. Skipper tried to throw me off my game already this morning by walking in and saying, "You told me the form had to be yellow." Well, I looked it up this morning, and it says what you carry with you has to be red. And that's not necessarily true, which is why you have to look at your own state to see what the requirement is. There are standard, it was like a dog tag.
Yeah.
Is what I like the military issues to people. The tags.
Bracelets.
Can be in a bracelet, but it was surrounded by red, and the form was red, but the actual form for the state of Florida is yellow. And when you fill out the form at the bottom, it's got an area that you can cut off, laminate, and have with you all the time, and that would be yellow. So
I didn't
dive into it.
I didn't know that the doctor kind of had to sign off on it.
I didn't either.
You know, and what they're saying is this should be for people that are terminally ill, not for healthy people. I mean, something can happen. I could get bucked off and quit breathing. I've seen that happen at a rodeo. I mean, they jar so hard they're done. Well, they brought them back to life. They're fine. So, but if they had a DNR, you couldn't do that. So it's not always the right thing to have. I'm thinking like, I know heaven's going to be better than here, but I know Kathy ain't ready for me to go. You know, I'm not sure about y'all, but you know, so that was eye-opening that your doctor.
Right.
We're rednecks. We don't even have a primary doctor, you know, half the time. So that's good information.
I think what it will make you do is take that step back and really think about, what does DNR, do not resuscitate, what does that really mean? If you get bucked off and the wind's knocked out of you, does that mean just not do anything to try and help you? Or is it, if it's generally related to a cardiac or a pulmonary issue, that is like a heart
Yeah.
attack, or
Yeah.
you have something going on in your lungs that does not allow you to breathe. I'm thinking about, and I did not give her warning, so I won't use names, an event that happened just a couple of weeks ago where somebody around me could not get their breath. They could not breathe. Would that constitute using the DNR? Not at all. Not at all. This is when it's life-threatening. This is when, not to say that them not being able to get their breath to them was not life-threatening because they couldn't get their air, but it wasn't something that was going to kill them at the end of the day. So,
Well, here's the problem that many of us have. I don't want to be hooked to a machine the rest of my life.
me either.
Now, if it's to that, but here's what I know, because I've been there too many times. People have a DNR, but they don't have it visible. The paramedics get there, they put them on life support, so then somebody has to say when to unplug it. That's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Who has that authority? And one of the things that it needs to be is not necessarily, I don't want Kathy on mine because we may be together when it happens. It needs to be somebody that probably will not be with you at the time.
Correct.
Because you're always going to have somebody that'll fight it and say, no, 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 no.
I think, let me interrupt you. I think that the good point that you made there was, this is when it's if a healthy person does one, it's because they know that CPR is not going to be effective. It's because they don't want to be on life support at the end of the day. And so that's the part that will really make you have to think. And I'm going to take it to the people side of it, because Skipper and I always have this people task discussion going on. But on the people side of it, if you know that your family members are not going to be supportive of doing anything except everything they can do to keep you alive, and that is not what you want, you need to have it in place so that your decision has already been made. This isn't about them being emotional at the time. I'm going to take it a little bit away from people. I'm going to put it with animals. Sometimes things happen to our critters. And when it happens, and all of a sudden you have to go to an emergency vet, and you have to make really tough decisions, and every tough decision you make is going to cost you more and more and more. I had a dog that all of a sudden something crazy went on, had to take him to the vet. Had I gone with my emotions, I would have walked away with over $15,000 in testing and bills, and he wasn't going to survive anyway.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, what he had was something that he could not survive. It was a cancer where the blood cell, it ate the blood cells and ate what reproduced the blood cells. So nothing would have saved this dog. And it could have cost me thousands of dollars had I not already had a conversation with my vet, and he said, call, and I'll talk you through it if you're ever in the middle of that.
Yeah.
So taking it away from the people, and people are even more important, or should be, note to self, people should be way more important to you than an animal is. And so it's going to be even tougher to make that right decision for them.
Yeah,
You're laughing at
I'm
me.
reminded one time it was actually at the story of Jesus where they did the run through. One of the horses broke his leg running through, and they put him down. Kathy broke her leg. We didn't put her down. But I want to tell you a story that I think will kind of.
Kathy, my heart. Thank you.
I want to tell you this story about my brother-in-law that since the story has passed away. But he had heart trouble, and I don't know, he was in his 70s, mid-70s probably, and they did a 6-way bypass. I didn't even know they could do that many. Well, as it was turning out, they had, Roger and my sister Judy, they had a cabin up in the mountains, and for part of his recuperation, he wanted to go to the cabins. So he said, as soon as they discharge me, we're going to the cabins. So he had to do a stress test. I mean, this had been weeks since surgery. I mean, he was up and going, could drive. So he does a stress test. We leave the next day, go to the cabin, and he's got to walk every day. We're walking up and down them hills, and he says, I just got to take a break. I said, that's fine with me. So about the next day, he gets a phone call from the nurse. He says, you got to be in here tomorrow. He says, I'm in Tennessee. That ain't going to happen. Well, we found some trouble, and you need to be in here. So that night, he tells Kathy and I during dinner, he says, I'm not doing that again. I'm not going through that again. And it had to be a God thing, because I'm not that sensitive. We're sitting there eating, and I let him talk, and I said, Roger, when them 2 daughters get through talking to you, you're going to do it again. And he did, and he had another 3-way that took longer because of all the scar tissue. But then you fast forward, and they believe he had a stroke. Paramedics come. Basically, they put him on life support. They took him to the helicopter. The helicopter wouldn't even fly off with him. So then they take him to the hospital. Then they take him to another hospital, put him on the COVID floor. His wife gets COVID. I get COVID. And he's brain dead.
Right.
And now somebody's got to say unplug him. And I made the mistake, and I don't want anybody to ever make this mistake. I'm there with my sister when the doctors are talking, and he says, we've done all the brain scans, and I don't see anything. What he meant is he was brain dead.
Right.
I took it as he didn't see anything wrong. And I'm like, wow, he just in a coma, might come back. But what he was really saying is there's zero activity. And one family member just would not agree to unplugging him. And that's why everybody needs to know what the person's wishes are. This isn't about you, this is about them. And it takes the responsibility and the guilt off of me. Now, people, if you put me on your list, I'll pull the plug myself.
Be really careful, but know that he will do what needs to be done.
Because heaven is better.
Right.
Now, if I think that you could come out and live a healthy life, I'm not. Never mind.
Okay.
You better start.
So
maybe.
you're doing what we talked about, and you're going into next week's discussion.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay, because one of the key things that he said in his story is he told them what he wanted. Telling you is not good enough.
Exactly.
Telling you does not cause a DNR, a do not
Yep.
resuscitate. You have to have it in writing. It has to be signed by a physician. It has to be dated, and it has to be readily available, visible, so that anybody that is addressing this person, you, because it's your DNR, anybody addressing you knows what your wishes are.
Question.
Uh-oh.
You don't have to have an answer. But if something happens, I know a man, older man. I mean, he was 80. Dang, that ain't near as old as it used to be. But anyhow, he fell out of steps, and they found him. I mean, nobody was even there. They hooked him up, put him on life support. He does not have a DNR. So who determines when to turn him off? When you don't have a DNR.
That's when you get into the family issues.
And they fight over it.
And they fight over, and the likelihood of everybody being on the same page on what to do is zero. Zero. Because when you think about it, everybody takes in and has different feelings about that person, the circumstances, what they believe, and what they believe may determine how they respond to that. One of the things I did look into it is, does a DNR go against our religion? It does not. All it is saying is you are making a decision up front that you do not want to be on life support ongoing, and that you don't want your family to have to make that decision. So let's talk a little bit, and Kathy's going to put some links on the YouTube and on the website so that people can go to it if they want to. Really key to understand is Florida may have different rules and regulations than every other state in the country. That's not because we're completely different, but that's because different people run and are involved in our health department. And your state health department, they usually call it State Department of Health, is who ultimately sets the parameters for what's legal in that state. So if you go to the website, it'll talk about it, and I did a link that takes you straight to that portion of it, because that website can be very overwhelming because there's so many different things out there that you could want to talk about. And what it'll tell you is it'll give you a portion where there's Q&A. So I'm going to throw some questions out there because people don't think about these things. And I learned a lot just doing the research, preparing for this, in spite of the fact I thought it was going to be very simple and I could just come up and talk about it. God always prepares you, and I was very thankful because my first role with CDF, Citizens Defending Freedom, was research and accountability. And so learning how to really research something came in so handy in doing this, because every time I took a step, I took another and another and another until I couldn't take any more steps. And then I would go back to the beginning and go down a different trail to see if there was something there that told me something that was different. Ruh-roh.
Well,
dive in.
Yeah. With all that being said, CDF, Hillsborough County, has changed. They're no longer an affiliate. They're now a chapter. They've changed some of the leadership. And Debbie is the interim director
Yes.
of Hillsborough County. She'll be having her first meeting that she is in charge of in, what's the date?
On the 15th of June.
On the 15th of June.
South Baptist Church in Plant City.
And we
on
will
39.
be there to support her.
Thank you.
Now, I will say, if you're in Polk County, their meeting is this coming Thursday at 6:30 at the gym. And, it's part of the sermon.
I think you're sidetracking.
I know, but it was an opportunity because
right.
we are going to support you.
Thank you very much.
Now
I
go back to
appreciate
work.
that. Okay.
Back to this.
Thank you, Kathy.
There was a question on Facebook,
Yes, ma'am.
and it says, can the DNR be on your phone, or does it have to be on paper writing? Can you have a picture of that on your phone?
I have not researched the phone ability. The chances are, and we had a good discussion about this between a couple of us in the last week. The chances of an emergency personnel coming in, if something happens at home, chances of them going in your phone and trying to find it is like non-existent. They're not going to. They're going to look for a yellow piece of paper on your refrigerator, on your headboard, on your dresser mirror, something that as they're going through the house to you stands out, they see, and they get it. In the hospital, they have a whole different procedure. I don't know what it is, but this is so you're prepared if something happens to you at home or elsewhere. Yes, ma'am.
She needs a microphone. And
Your family really needs to know you have that, like all your family members, because when my grandmother had her stroke and was in the hospital, My mother didn't know, and she had one in her file, but the hospital didn't tell my mom. And so mom was having to try to decide whether or not to put a feeding tube in her and all this kind of stuff. And when you're in that really stressful situation, that's really hard to make those decisions. And when it finally came out that she had this DNR, it took all that pressure away.
Yep.
Correct.
I think you had a question too. Alan?
Yes. Also, make sure if you go to the hospital to have something done, a living will, and a copy of this is with that living will, because that way they see it in your folder. It is supposed to be identified at the door and above the bed. A DNR is in place.
Correct.
One-
Correct, and that was kind of like when
Yeah.
I went for my surgery, and you spend an hour before going in because you have to fill out all these papers if you don't already have them in place, and you have to make decisions about who's going to make the final decision if something goes wrong right then and there. Really do your family a favor, do yourself a favor, and have that all figured out in advance. And it doesn't matter what you're going into the hospital for surgery for.
Yeah.
Mine was just to get a hysterectomy. It's not just a
If they
minor
put you
surgery,
under-
but if they're going to put you under anesthesia, they're going to want all of this documentation in place on that very remote chance that something's going to go wrong.
Can
Okay.
I do one thing and we'll quit DNR? If you truly want it, wear a bracelet. They're not going to go look at your, chances are you're going to be in a car wreck when you need it. You're not
Correct.
going to go to the house and find all these documents. They're not going to look in your wallet to see if you got one. If you truly, you have a bracelet or a necklace, they've got them like the dog tags.
Correct.
That would be the answer if you truly.
But I
The
do
more I
want to.
thought,
I
I
do
don't
want
think
to
I
talk
want it
about.
anymore.
I do want to talk about a couple of things because it sounds like they're going to do nothing, and that's not the case. If something happens and you need oxygen, they're going to give you oxygen. If there are other things that are, if there's pain associated with it, they're going to give pain medications. The only thing they're not going to do is what would be considered life-sustaining.
Restart your heart.
Correct. So you just have to think about it. What age are you? And what's the likelihood of something happening that is going to cause you to be on life support?
Yeah.
That
Can you-
would be
can you-
the big question.
Can you come through it and then live a normal life?
Correct.
Or you come through it and you're not going to live a normal life? To me is
Correct.
the answer. He's got the mic and then JP. So, I
Well-
mean, these are difficult questions.
With the DNR, that pertains mostly to the hospital. If fire rescue comes and picks you up to take you, legally obligated to do what they can do until higher authority precedes that.
Unless you have a very visible DNR.
If
That's why they tell you, put it on your refrigerator, put it on your headboard, put it on the mirror of your dresser so that it is visible to them when they walk in. If it is not, because there's one of the questions is, can doctors ignore DNR? No. They can be held liable for failing to follow the patient's instructions. EMS
But I
is the
think-
same.
I don't know that EMS can be the same because they're not doctors.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Let
and that
me-
might be the direction from their, like from their
We'll
chief,
research that.
right? You know,
I'll
that's-
research that and get back with you.
and that's where he's
Because I
he's-
read it somewhere, but
yeah,
I'll
yeah,
research.
he's speaking from the point of
specific.
view as an EMT firefighter
Yeah.
coming in, and they're not doctors, so they cannot make that pronounced thing, you know. Right. There's a doctor, then they can do that. So that's a question.
Microphone.
From experience, as an EMT paramedic, you go into a home, it don't matter what kind of documents, because you're at a certain level of medical help until you are proceed in higher authority in the medical field you have to do what you're trained to do. Then, if you get them to the hospital, the doctor says, there's no hope. Okay, that's it.
Well, it's too late now.
Yeah.
You've already done it.
But the
Now you've got to
paramedic-
determine who's going to unplug them.
The paramedic can't go on that DNR.
Okay, I will dig into that and
That's a
do a
good one.
quick follow-up at
Okay.
the beginning of our
Yeah,
next session.
good. JP, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just pondering, we talked about a couple of different scenarios. So I'll just use myself. Let's say I'm working outside and I have a heart attack. I'm relatively healthy and the paramedics show up and my heart's not beating. It stopped. If I have the DNR, even though I'm very healthy, and there's a good chance if they were to resuscitate me, I'd be fine. But if I have the DNR, are they going to not do it? Is there provisions where in case it's like, okay, now the horse kicked me in the head, and we all know someone where that happened, where they're no longer able to be resuscitated and there's no chance of them surviving? Is there conditions for the DNR in which case, there's provisos, so to speak, that, if it looks like I could be resuscitated and live, great, go ahead. If not, then don't.
I personally say if you got a DNR and your heart stops, they can't do it. That's why I think it says you should talk to your doctor, and the doctor say, no, you're too healthy. You don't need a DNR. I mean, I've changed my mind about getting a DNR because I'm healthy. Now, if I get cancer, oh, you better put it on me, But I think these are things that need to be talked out and put in advance. But the thing that I want to get to before we forget it is the real issue is each person should make known to their family what they want so that in an order they are put on life support. No one has to feel guilty to tell them to unplug because they're not there anyhow.
That's why they tell you to think about it and
Yeah.
work with your doctor
Yeah,
on it.
yeah.
This
That's the
is
answer.
your decision. We could do Q&A all day long, and at the end of the day, I'm going to tell you, it's your decision with your doctor what you decide to do
Can I
and
say
what you have
something?
in place.
Because I think this will answer that question. If something like that happens to you, JP, the paramedics are going to come out and do their job. You don't get put on life support until you get to the hospital. So you're not put on life support when the EMS come out. So they're going to do whatever they need to do, and then you go to the hospital, and that determination whether or not to put you on life support will happen. And it doesn't happen right away necessarily. It's once you put that ventilator in you, then, that kind of answers that question.
And I'm going to, one of there's a number of different forms and pieces of information that go with it. Florida does what's called rulemaking that follows up directives so that it's very clear what their intention is. They go through a public hearing process. The public can comment on it. It's an extensive, can take up to 6 months type process. But what it states in the Florida Administrative Code that was from their final adopted rule was an emergency medical technician or paramedic shall verify the identity of the patient who is subject to the DNR form or patient identification device. Verification shall be obtained from the patient's driver's license, other photo identification, and from witness in the presence of the patient. During each transport, the EMS provider shall ensure that a copy of the DNR, they call it a DNRO, it's an order, resuscitate order, form or the patient identification device accompanies the live patient. The EMS provider shall that doesn't give options, shall provide comforting, pain relieving, and any other medically indicated care short of respiratory or cardiac resuscitation. So, know what you're doing if you're going to do one of these forms, and make sure your family knows how you feel about it, and that you have it in place. Because if you go and make sure, for example, if you go in for surgery and you fill one out for them not to restore you should something happen, then make sure that if you don't want that to stay on file, that you revoke it. Because otherwise, they will still have that in your medical file. So you need to make sure that you revoke it.
This is a lot of work.
No kidding.
I've changed my mind. I don't want one.
Well, and that's the point of us talking about these things, so that everybody understands, because, people have thrown the term DNR around for years, probably since I was a kid, and I never fully understood the implications of having that form on me, on whether they would restore you or not. So and things change over the years. So someone who was an EMS or a paramedic 20 years ago, this language may be different, but this language has been in place since 2019. And so anybody that's currently a paramedic would know this language. It would be part of their training, and they would have to sign off saying they clearly understand what this means.
I apologize.
I know, but you don't mean
we
it.
didn't even get on the right subject today, did we?
No.
But one of the things that made me think about JP's question, there's a difference between your heart stops and they zap you and start it back,
Correct.
than putting you on a machine that's going to pump your heart for you.
Correct.
But man, I think it goes back to your health and what kind of life you're going to live after the situation. If you're going to be on life support for the rest of your life, no.
Right. And it's not meant to be a downer type conversation.
No.
It's meant to be one of those conversations of understand the things that are out there that you may or may not want to have in place should something happen.
We've only got 12 minutes left.
And we're going to have a lot of fun because there's a lot of documents that we're going to be talking about. I would love to dive deep into a will, but I think what I want to do is hold on that one for a couple of weeks, because I'm going to give everybody a little bit of homework, because there's a lot of pieces of information that you would have to fill out, because you have to think about, okay, all of, and this also will get into what's important to you as a person versus what's important to your family. Because you may have something that, oh my gosh, this is so important to me. And your family is saying, I don't want it. I don't want that. I don't want to take that. I don't have anywhere in my house for that. And so these are conversations to have so that people know what it is that is important to others, not just what's important to me. Because chances are, if you want to think everything's important to you and you want to give it to somebody, have at it. Have at it. But there's a good likelihood it will go in the trash or be given away or something else. So if there's somebody, you may have a friend who loves that piece of furniture that you have and it would fit perfectly in their house, but you think it needs to stay in the family, give it to that friend after you make sure your family doesn't want it.
Kathy, I want Jess to get the massage chair. Christian's already got one.
Got it. I'll put his name on it today.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
I'm going to tell you.
I love that you just said that, because you just opened a door. You do
Okay.
know that, right? Okay, so that's great to say it, but it needs to be in writing in your will, because there is nothing that tears a family apart faster than somebody passing and it becoming a free-for-all, because that person did not define what their wishes were for where things were going to go. I've seen families that were so close, you would never have expected something like that to tear them apart. And today, they don't speak to each other. It's horrible. And it also ties with what we were just talking about. And I'll share my own experiences with my family that I don't like to speak about openly all the time because, I really wanted to believe I didn't have a dysfunctional family. But what I've had to learn over the years is we all have dysfunctions in our families. And it's just what happens. But do what you can to minimize that dysfunction becoming blatantly obvious to the whole world.
Yeah, that's true.
Sorry.
I was just going to say something about writing every little thing down on your will. Be sure you update it.
Yes.
Because my mother wrote every little thing. I mean, chairs, mirrors. I mean, she had everything written down. And then it got to the end of her life, and she didn't even have any of that stuff.
That's a great point.
I heard a story about a man that got hearing aids and he didn't tell his family. And his neighbor says, "You got hearing aids?" He said, "Yeah, I've had them for 3 weeks. Changed my will 3 times."
I knew you'd bring the light side to it. Thank you. But I want to go back to why are we having this conversation to begin with? And Skipper called me up one day. So this is just a warning to everybody if you get one of these phone calls. Skipper called me up one day and he says, "Deb, I got the strangest call from the mother of Sue and Tegan's grandmother." And I said, "You did?" I said, "Really? What was that all about? Would you like to?"
She's listening.
I'm sure she is, and I'm sure she's okay, because I love her, and I am so glad she brought this up, and the reason she brought it up. So you want to share the conversation?
She was worried about Tegan and Sue ride together a lot, and if they were in a wreck, who would make the medical decisions for them? And that's what brought this class all about, that we need to know. I mean, every year I go to the hospital and I say, "Do you have a living will?" And I say, "No." It's time we did it. We are procrastinators. Whether it's a living will, it's a health document, a financial document, and my goal...
But a living will, just to correct, a living will is different
Yes.
than your last will and testament. And so we will talk about what those differences are in the upcoming weeks.
My goal is, because I know that we're so dysfunctional in procrastinating, that we leave this class, we're not going to go do it. It's a good idea. I need to, but I'm not going to. So my goal is we're going to fill these documents out at class if we can. Some of them we can, right?
Some of them we can.
Do we have time today? Are we going to do any today? I mean, we've only got 6 minutes.
No, but everybody that is here has received a copy
Okay.
of the document that is a do not resuscitate order, and so that they can read it and make their decisions about it. It's not always going to be appropriate to fill it out right then and there. For example, when you're doing your will, that's where I was talking about. You're going to have some homework because you really need to think about what it is you want in there, because there's a number of different key parts to it that need to be filled out, where you have your belongings, you have your finances, you have your real estate, and how's that all supposed to be handled?
Yep.
And you may set it up because there's also what's called a living trust, and that does a whole different set of actions at the end. We're going to go through each of these. It could be very overwhelming if we tried to do it all at one time. I had to laugh because, again, in doing the research, I go out and it says there's 9 different things that you're supposed to do and have in place. And I'm like, 9? I can only think of 4 that I even think are that important to do. And so we're going to go through them. Some of them we may do 3 in one day, just to say this is something that you could consider doing. But we will spend some time on each of the ones that are really important.
My other thing is to try to get people who are watching. If you come, we may help you fill some of them out. So if not...
And depending on what your situation is, I would highly recommend there are people who do, all of this is called estate planning.
Yeah.
And I would highly recommend that you get an expert on estate planning to help you. I'm not an expert. I just have done enough research to know the things that I want to have in place. Most of them I have in place. I chuckled when Beverly talked about updating your will, because when I had to officially do my will, when we weren't sure whether I had lung cancer or not, that was a little traumatic to have 2 days to put it together before I was supposed to have something done. And so now I have to go back and update it, because I don't have some of the things anymore. Life has changed, and it's time to make some changes to it. Yeah. So, lots to talk about. It's a great topic. Very thankful that it was raised, and hopefully we can work with Sue and Tegan to also put in place what they need to. My dad did something. I'm going to go to a story. Is that okay? Are you ready to be done? Do we have time?
Yep, we got 5 minutes.
Okay. My dad did an amazing job putting together a notebook that has everything we need to know in it. And it has his will, it has his power of attorney, it has where his bank accounts, it has the passwords to get into everything, because one of the last thing on the list that for estate planning documents is provision of digital assets. How are you going to get into pictures, bank accounts? How are you going to get into all those things if they're only done on the computer and they're protected by passwords?
Yeah.
How are you going to get that stuff back if you don't have the information to access it? So I just shout out to my dad for doing an amazing job putting together. And he grumbled the whole time he was putting it together, because it's a Kathy or Julia type of document where you have to be very methodical and pull all of the information. If you work, you probably have life insurance through your work. If you work, you probably have done different things where you've designated beneficiaries. All of that information needs to be in there, because that way, if something happens, they have that notebook and they just they can easily access everything. So, go ahead, you can close. I think I talked more than I intended, and my words, I'm done.
I mean, it's a lot of information that needs to be done. You know, I am on a journey to try to prepare you for your loved ones to die. Because guess what? Either they're going to die or you're going to die. Somebody's dying. Nobody gets out of here alive. And Jess says, I think I'll wait for Jesus. That's my son.
That was a great story.
But you know, there's just so much to this that could make it easier if we just prepare, decide how we're going to do it, what they want, what are their wishes, and what are my wishes.
What are your wishes?
Exactly.
Because what you're preparing, this is about you communicating clearly to your family and loved ones, this is what I want.
Well, I've always said I want a DNR, but I don't anymore because I'm healthy.
Right.
You know, if I get bucked off, my heart quits, zap me. But, you know, if I fall and hit my head and I'm brain dead, unplug me. But,
Right.
you know, the deal is...
And don't make Kathy make that decision because you haven't. Don't make the family have to come together and make that decision. Have somebody...
When I put Beverly on that, she'll unplug me in a heartbeat.
Have somebody... I felt really bad years ago because my whole family said, yeah, we have you down if that decision has to be made. And I said, me? Why would you put me down? And they said, because you have had so many animals and you have had to make this decision over and over and over, and we have watched you, and every time you do it, it's for the benefit of the animal, not you.
Yeah.
And so that's important because at that point, it's about that person. and their quality of life and what their wishes are.
All right, let's pray. Father God, we're seeking your wisdom. We need your help in making these decisions because each one of us, you already have our days numbered. And you know how, what, when, and where. And we're looking for you for guidance. We're trying to help our family and ourselves get through this the best way we can. So we're asking for you to lead us and guide us and direct us in the path that you would like for each individual to take. And we thank you in advance for what you're going to do as we glorify you in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank
Amen.
you.
Thank you.